Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. Hey world, this is Mike McVeigh giving a bit of warning for season 3 of Nobody's a Nobody podcast, the podcast where I interview people I find absolutely interesting, and I believe you will too if you give them a chance. Labor Day weekend will begin the promising season 3 as we revisit some of our guests from season 1 and get a clue on how they are doing, as well as interview a new slew to make up our episode queue. You can find us on Spotify, Audible, podcast players of your choice, and remember, nobody's a nobody. That means you. Until next time. Sad for you, man. All right, our final question, which I know nothing about, so if anything, I'll be asking you follow-up questions on this. Hey, Kathy asked another question, so thank you, Kathy. You're already competing with Aaron there. Kathy asks, or actually just tells us in a very declarative statement, tell me about carbon capture so we don't shoot ourselves in the foot about fossil fuels. And I'm going to make up something that has nothing to do with carbon capture. So carbon capture is like you get a carbon ball and you go like, Charizard, I'm going to capture you. And then you find out you capture carbon instead. But no, Matt, tell us what carbon capture is so we don't shoot ourselves in the foot about fossil
I'm kind of
fuels.
curious what shooting ourselves in the fossil fuels necessarily refers to. And maybe I should have asked this about that. What would you interpret that statement to mean?
Again, I didn't look up anything about carbon capture. I kind of somehow missed this question when I was studying all the other things. So based on nothing at all except for this question, it almost sounds like the way that reading this great book by my friend Matt Jensen about oil and gas industry has not really helped out in this answer. But I know that we get a lot of our oil and stuff based off of like prehistoric creatures like dinosaurs blood and stuff. I'm being serious when I answer this, but
it's true though. Dinosaur blood and old leaves.
So I'm guessing that's because fossil fuels make me think of stuff that were basically caused by dinosaurs. And I probably have that understanding wrong. So carbon capture, in my uneducated opinion, makes me think of like kind of carbon dating, but it's like a new way of being able to extract something from the fuel. And we literally capture the carbon. I don't know anything else other than that. So the reason why I would think it would shoot ourselves in the foot is that it's actually getting us a lesser yield than traditionally.
Well,
that's about the best I can do. So make fun
well,
of
I wasn't
me,
really necessarily asking about that.
Matt.
I was asking about the second part of the sentence. What do you think she means by we don't shoot ourselves in the foot about fossil fuels? Like we're basically overusing and over polluting and not able to turn it back.
Well, tell me what carbon capture
is. So
carbon
capture is basically capturing carbon that's released by burning fossil fuels, essentially. So CO2 and CO2 is one of 3 greenhouse gases that has commonly been targeted as causing or helping contribute to climate change.
Right. Okay. Based on that, it's a good thing that I gave you my uneducated answer first. My educated answer. So carbon capture.
No, carbon capture is the ability
fuels.
Of basically reversing the carbon released for fossil fuels. So you can capture carbon and then you can store it underground. You would burn fossil fuels and then you basically offset it by capturing carbon.
Okay. So then that makes perfect sense. From how much, and I actually do know Kathy, so hi Kathy. I would assume, hopefully correctly, that we're not burning a lot of stuff to basically kind of what I said, even though it was without the dinosaurs, that we're going to get the highest yield possible from the fossil fuels. So if we use the fossil fuels by burning them and then try to capture the carbon, I'm going to guess that that's a smaller yield overall than using the fossil fuels normally.
Well, how about
correct?
I'll just give my response to what I think she says. So we'll talk more in depth in the future about carbon capture. This has been for like oil companies and oil and gas field service companies. So basically the suppliers. This has been a big focus, and it's to offset carbon usage. So when you drive your car, you emit CO2 through the tailpipe, and that's considered a greenhouse gas, so essentially a pollutant. So if you're able to essentially offset that by pulling carbon out of the air and then storing it in a place where it's not in the air anymore, such as underground and depleted oil and gas wells, then that essentially tapes carbon out of the atmosphere. And it's kind of an interesting thing because CO2 is what helps plants grow. So like greenhouses in the Netherlands, for instance, they use a lot of greenhouses there. They basically pump CO2 into the greenhouses at high levels. So it's got a much higher CO2 level that's already in air, and that helps stimulate growth of these greenhouses or the plants in the greenhouses. And I don't know if it's necessarily related, but you look at China, and China, since they've increased CO2, the greenery from satellite images of the country, the surface greenery has increased also. So it's kind of like this interesting thing where CO2 is not good for us, but it's good for the environment, right? And well, in consideration, but the ocean also is a CO2 store, and CO2 stored in the ocean makes the ocean more acidic, and that basically causes sometimes a unbalanced ecosystem for stuff like crabs and stuff to live in. So there's a lot of different things in here. Carbon capture, they basically, the kind of thing that they use now are primarily large fans that pull in air, and then they extract the carbon, and then they store that underground. So, that would be a natural thing that oil and gas companies would do, because essentially that's part of their business model now. I've talked in the past too about using CO2 because you can CO2 flood oil and gas wells in areas that are kind of like interconnected on the ground. So you pump CO2 down there, and then it pushes out oil and gas. So you change basically the bottom hole pressure and increase production by injecting CO2 in there. So CO2 can be a storing mechanism, and also a mechanism that helps produce more in oil and gas. So it's kind of like this interesting dynamic that we have in the US right now. I feel like the oil and gas companies are primarily interested in it because it's tangent to their business model. They're also able to reduce CO2, which has been identified as the key culprit by, a lot of these inter-country kind of more global groups like the UN as targets. And so it's kind of like, yeah, it's good business for them. That's what they have their expertise in. And yeah, so Norway, for instance, is using their depleted fields in the North Sea and basically offsetting all their pollution in the air now by pulling CO2 from the air, apparently, and then injecting it in these depleted fields under the North Sea and storing that essentially for the future. So it's there's a couple different basically pollutants off of basing or using fossil fuels, burning those, whether that be in combustion engines or for electricity generation. But and kind of a weird thing too is that water vapor released from hydrogen, burning hydrogen, after you burn it through a fuel cell in a car, it releases water vapor. That also is technically a greenhouse gas also. So it's kind of like this, I'd say a complex topic, and probably something that we should spend more time in the future kind of walking through about it.
Yeah. And I'll just give a quick thing of why is carbon capture bad and storage bad. This literally popped up when I typed in, all I did was type in carbon capture. Carbon capture and storage is expensive, energy intensive, and unproven at scale, and it does not reduce carbon in the atmosphere. So we definitely have a future episode out of this. Kathy, feel free to write another response, one answering that how great of a job I did with dinosaurs, knowing that answers almost every question. But two, if you have maybe more specific, because your it's more of a statement, so maybe you can ask that more into a question that Matt will be able to answer correctly, and I'll be able to answer with dinosaurs. Make sure to listen to some of our future episodes. We have a lot of cool things coming up. So please stay tuned to your favorite podcast player, Spotify or Audible, or really pretty much everywhere, because when you're the New Next, the TNN, you know it's good.
Amen.
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.